In this video, we are going to get our project imported into source control. So, for those of you guys who don't know what that is, a source control system is merely a way to track changes of your project over time. It's a way for you to to have what are called commits, or change sets, where if you change a bunch of files, you then package that entire change into a sort of atomic unit. And the reason that's important is so that you can go back and forward in time and watch the project evolve, roll back changes that were unsuccessful, and prevent you from having to do nasty, archaic things like comment out code that you might need later, because guess what? You probably won't. Anyway, this isn't a video about source control. If you're interested, I highly encourage people become more familiar with Git, because Git is the source control system we are going to be using. And I especially want to get all this stuff set up for you guys because since we're giving you guys source code access, I want to do a commit after every video so you guys can see the state of the project as it was during every step of the video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to use the built-in tools in Android Studio to work with Git. And we'll get our initial commit going, and we'll also go ahead and push up into a hosting service. In this case, it's going to be Bitbucket, because Bitbucket allows unlimited private repositories for free, whereas GitHub does not. Anyway, so to do that, what I'm going to do is we need to turn this into a Git repository. Now, the easy way to do that, of course, if you're familiar with Git, is to get your Git executable, jump into your folder, your project folder, and type in git init. However, in Android Studio, we can simplify that by going up to VCS, up at the top. VCS stands for Version Control System. Then we go down to Import into Version Control. And we're going to have three options, I guess, or I guess four options. We have Import into CVS. CVS is a very old source control system that isn't very commonly used anymore. We have Import into Subversion. Subversion, you can think of Subversion as the version of, or a similar system to CVS that actually works. Subversion is mostly on its way out as well. Subversion, the abbreviation for Subversion is SVN, if anybody has never seen that before. We have Mercurial. There we go. We have Mercurial, and what that is it's a distributed source control system similar to Git. It's a little bit more Windows friendly than Git is, but over the years, Git has become way more Windows friendly than it used to be. And as a result, if I had to choose between the two, I would go with Git. And finally, we have Git, create Git repository, which Git is going to be the source control system we're going to be using. However, when I hit enter, it's going to ask me what folder I want to create the repository in. In this case, it's going to automatically select the project folder, and I think that's a good place to go about creating this repository. So I'll go ahead and hit OK. However, I'm going to get an error, and that is that I haven't actually installed a Git client yet. Because basically the way that the Android Studio's integration with Git works is it defers all the commands into the Git executable. So what I need to do is I need to install Git. And so it has this link for fixit, and all that's going to do is say path to Git executable, git.exe. But in this case, when I install Git, I'm going to have Git automatically added to my path environment variable, so I can leave this as it is, and in the future it'll find it. However, because when I install Git, my path environment variable is going to be modified, I'm going to make sure to close out of Android Studio entirely so that when I get Git installed, then I relaunch Android Studio, then Android Studio reads the my path environment variable, and then everything becomes awesome again. Okay, so let's go ahead and load up the implementation of Git that we're going to be using for Windows. And what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and launch a browser, bring it over here, and I'm going to go to git-scm.com. So git-scm.com, which is going to be kind of the homepage-ish thing for Git. This is actually pretty new, to my knowledge anyway. But anyway, so we have our git-scm.com. If you want to go ahead and learn how to work with Git with the command line, you can go over here to try Git, which is going to be a thing hosted on GitHub that allows you to kind of get familiarized with the Git version control system and the different Git commands. Now, fortunately, although I do recommend people to go through this if they've never used Git before, and especially if they've never used source control before, fortunately, all of these commands are abstracted away by the Android Studio. Anyway, let's go back to git.scm.com. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go down here to Downloads, the bottom left. I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to select Windows, which also there's this Downloads for Windows right here because it detected my user agent is Windows. So I'm going to go ahead and download that, and we're downloading version 1.9.5. And let's go ahead and let it sit there for a while doing whatever it thinks it needs to do after it already downloaded the entire executable. Just kind of sitting there, and then it's done. Okay, so now that that's downloaded, I'll click on the installer. I'll accept that UAC prompt that you guys might not have seen. Then I'm just going to next. I'm going to next. And for these options here, what I'm going to do is I don't care about additional icons. Windows Explorer integration, sure. Let's use the Git cheetah. I don't often use it from Windows Explorer, but it could be a convenient feature. And then I'm going to associate Git configuration files with the default text editor. That's good. Associate SH files to be run with bash. That's good. And don't care about using TrueType font. So let's hit next. Next. Okay, so here's an important field to worry about when installing Git. So Git is going to, what we're installing here is a command line utility, git.exe, and all the support things that Git needs to work with it. Now this option basically tells us how deeply we want to integrate Git into our system. So we can say use Git from Git bash only. What that does is it won't modify our path, meaning I won't be able to just go to a command line prompt and type in Git. That won't work if I select this option. Now, if I select this option, Git will be added to my path, or my path. I mixed bash and path together for some reason. My path, and it'll only have a the Git executable. So it's not going to conflict with anything I already have installed, assuming that I don't have any other executable in my path named Git. And then there's this. There's use Git and optional Unix tools from the Windows command prompt. So this will not only will it install Git to my path so that I can access Git everywhere, it'll also add other Unix tools, Windows implementation of other Unix tools into my path. You may or may not want this. In the case of this video, I'm going to go with the middle option, because the middle option is pretty safe. The middle option balances convenience with safety. It's not going to override any of our existing Windows executables, but it will allow the convenience of being able to run Git from anywhere. Furthermore, Android Studio will pick it up immediately, rather than us having to tell Android Studio where Git was installed to. So I'm going to select that option. I'll hit Next. For the line endings, I'm going to check out Windows style, commit Unix style. That's pretty much going to be the most common line ending implementation that you're going to see. So I'll hit Next, and it'll install. So now it's installing Git. Notice how I close the command prompt window, because I'm going to be opening up a new one in a second, and the reason for that is, again, because it's modifying the path, I'm going to make sure that I get the new environment variable loaded into my command prompt. Alright, so now I have that installed. Let's go ahead and open up a command prompt again and type in Git and check that out. We have Git and it's installed. So we have, typing in Git gives us a list of all the options that we have with using it. Alright, let's close that out. Close that out. Now let's go ahead and launch Android Studio again. Now that we have it installed. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the project we want to be associated with Git. Then I'm going to come back here up to the VCS menu, go to Import into Version Control, select Create Git Repository, and click that. Then for the path, I'm going to select Yora, the actual project root right here, and I'll select OK. And our Git repository is created. Doesn't look like a whole lot happened, but it did. Check this out. If I right-click this app and select, where are you? Show in Explorer, and bring over this that opened. Notice how there's a .git folder up here that we can't see because I don't have hidden files or hidden folders enabled. Oh, let's go ahead and fix that right now. Show hide hidden folders. There we go. So now I have hidden folders being shown, and we can see this .git folder. That .git folder is the Git repository, and the fact that it's in the root of here means that all of these files are now associated or under the control of that Git repository. All right, let's go ahead and make our first commit, because right now our Git repository is empty because we haven't committed anything into it. How do we do that? Well, now that we're in a project with a Git repository, or with a repository at all, look down here at the bottom. We now have version control and changes. So our version control is kind of a console that'll show us what commands are being sent in. Notice how git init was sent in order to create that Git repository. Changes, this shows us all of the changes that we've made since the last time we've committed our project. Also, what's great about this is this will create the proper, what's called a git ignore file. Notice how there's this new git ignore file right here that was created. What this file does is it tells Git which files not to commit to its repository. But anyway, so under here, we have our changes window, and we have all of our unversioned files. So what's an unversioned file? It's a file that hasn't yet, it's a file that meets two criteria. A, it has not been yet added to Git. B, it is not being excluded from the git ignore file. So it's a file that isn't ignored but hasn't been added yet, which all of our files are unversioned files because we haven't made any commits yet. So let's go ahead and fix that. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to select the top unversioned file. I'm going to scroll all the way down, hold down Shift, select the last unversioned file, right click, and I'm going to say add to VCS, add to version control system. Now look what changed. They turned green. In fact, you can see this inside of the project window itself. Notice how all these files turned green? That's because they're now part of the source control. Now what we need to do is we need to actually perform the commit. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say this little up arrow with VCS. I'm going to click this and it's going to give me the commit dialog. And the commit dialog, unfortunately, it only checked activity log. What I want to do here is I want to commit all of these files. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just check this. I'm going to check both the top files up here, or both the root folders of this application, so that all of these files will be committed in our commit. Then what I'm going to do here is on the commit message, I'm going to type in a message, a memorable message that describes the changes that were made to the application. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say video 1, or let's do, it's not video 1. What is it again? Video 14. So I'm going to say video 14 app part 1. What I'm doing here is I'm making a commit message that allows people to come back to this commit and see which video this bit of code was written on. So then I'm going to go ahead and say commit after I put in that commit message. Now notice what happens after it goes ahead. It's going to perform a code analysis and try to find warnings. It's probably going to find a couple warnings. Now it does. It finds 13 warnings. I'm not going to worry about the warnings. I'm just going to, in this video, I'm going to just select commit. Okay, so then it's going to say git username is not defined. Now, if you have already have git installed, then your git username will have been defined. But in the case that I just installed git, it's going to ask me for my name and email. So I'm going to say Nelson LeKay. And then I'm going to say nelson@3dbuzz.com. And I'm going to set the properties globally so that my name is known throughout my computer. Say set and commit. And we're committed. Now if I go over to changes and select log, look at that commit. So that's all the files that were changed or modified in any way. Let's go ahead and, before we push this up into Bitbucket, what I want to do is I want to show you guys how you would go about actually making a change and then committing that change, and then how we can see the diffs. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into res layout activity login. And for my layout height, I'm going to change it to match parent. So that's all I'm going to do. So now the button is the size of the parent. Now this is it. This is all I want to commit. This is all I wanted to do with this particular file. Notice how the color changed to this bluish color, indicating that I've made a change since the last commit. Now what I can do is I can come down here into changes, and notice how I have one changed file. I can double click this file if I want, or sorry, right click this file and say show diff to see exactly what was changed in this commit. Very, very useful, especially if you forget to commit or you make a bunch of changes and you want to see exactly what was changed, maybe revert a change if you want to. But anyway, now that I've done that, what I want to do is I want to commit this change. So I'm going to say commit changes. Notice how this was automatically selected. This activity log changed. Notice how there's no other thing to select because this is the only file that changed. And then I'm going to say video 15 at part 2. And then I'm going to say commit. And now that change is committed. Now if I go over here to log, notice how I have 2 commits. And I can see the change that happened in every single one. All right, I'm not going to talk about things like rebasing or different branches or merging or anything like that. This is going to be a very straightforward Git repository, mainly for your guys' benefit, so you guys can walk through the progression of the app. Again, I highly recommend checking out an actual Git tutorial. Now, the last thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and get this associated in with Bitbucket. What do I mean by that? Well, Bitbucket is a service that I can push this repository up to so I can access this repository from other computers. It also serves as an offsite backup of my code, which is very convenient. I highly encourage people to always use Git, no matter how big or small their project is. But if their project is of a particular size and up, I highly encourage people to go ahead and create a repository on some sort of service so that you don't lose it or mess up the repository or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is, off screen, I'm going to go over to bitbucket.org. So bitbucket.org, and I'm going to log in. If you don't already have an account with Bitbucket, this is the point in which you would create one. All right, so now that I'm logged in, I'm going to bring my window over. All I did was I went up to create, and I selected create repository. Now, if you just created a Bitbucket account, you will have the option of creating a repository just right in front of you. I believe that if you don't have any repositories, that there's this big button in the middle of the screen that says create your first repository. Anyway, let's go ahead and give the repository, I'm going to change the owner. This really only applies to me. I'm going to change it over to 3D Buzz. Unless you guys have an organization that you are doing this on the behalf of, you will typically just have your owner be yourself. And then for the name of this project, let's see. I guess I was just going to go ahead and say Yora Android. And so for the description, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to make sure it's a private repository. Make sure that it only allows private forks. We're going to be using Git instead of Mercurial. We're not going to worry about issue tracking or wiki. For the language, I guess we can just type in Java. And then I'm going to say create repository. All right, so this is the repository. So basically, this now has a place online that I'm able to push up another repository from and associate that repository with. So the most important bit of information here is going to be the path to the repository, the URL for this repository. And you can see it down here. If I say I already have an existing project, you can kind of infer where the path is to this repository by looking at this. So what's going on here? Well, basically what this is saying is if you have an existing project that already is a Git repository, we can add a remote to it. Now, a remote is simply an external location for a Git repository. So you have your local Git repository where you make commits to, but if you want to share it to somebody, share it to another location, you push it to a remote. But before you can push it to a remote, you have to make the repository aware of the remote. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this path right here, git@bitbucket.org, 3D Buzz, Yora Android, and I'm going to add it as a remote. I'm actually not sure if Android Studio has a GUI for adding remotes or managing them. So we're going to find out. Let's go on an adventure. If it doesn't, I'll show you guys how to do this from the command line because it's really pretty easy. Go to VCS. Now that I have Git enabled, under the VCS menu, there is now this Git submenu. So I have a bunch of cool stuff. Let's see if there's anything about remotes. There really isn't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say push, because if there is anything about remotes, it should be under the push option. Again, a push in Git is taking the change sets, the commits you've made, and sharing them with another repository so that other people can pull those change sets back down to their local repository. So I'm going to say push, and it's going to say can't push because no remotes are defined, but it's not giving me an option to add a remote. So I'm pretty sure, unless there's an option here, we have help, preview diff, ignored files, ignored group by, blah, 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 just a bunch of stuff that I really don't care about. Okay, so it doesn't seem like there's a simple way to change or to add a... So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you guys some quick command line wizardry. So let's open up our terminal. So in Android Studio, our terminal is basically just a command prompt that is automatically defaults to being inside of the directory that we are in, that our project is in. So what I can do here is I can say git remote add origin, and then I can just paste in, oops, that's not even close to what I wanted. Let me get that URL on my clipboard. And then I'm just going to hit Control V, and I'm going to paste in the URL. So what's going on here? Well, we're saying git, which it actually invokes the git executable, remote add, which adds a remote, the name of the remote. Now, you can have as many remotes as you want, but this is such a common scenario where we have this online location for our repository, and we have our local repository, and there's like a one-to-one mapping between the two. It's just a common pattern when using Git that there's a convention that the repository that kind of owns this repository, quote unquote, be called origin. The remote be called origin. So that's what we're going to make sure we have origin. And then we're going to put in the URL. So git at bitbucket.org, 3dbuzz, yourandroid.git. Let's say enter. And the remote has then been created, presumably. Yeah, okay, it did. It just didn't give me any feedback. So I tried to add it again, and it says fatal remote already exists, which means it was created successfully. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do a push, but we're going to run into an issue. Watch this. I'm going to go up to VCS, Git, and I'm going to come down here to push. Again, pushing pushes our changes up to a remote. Let's hit push. And now look at what we see. So we have this folder, or not this folder, this dialog with both our commits that need to be pushed. These are the two commits that we've made that aren't on the remote repository. Then what I'm going to do is say push current branch into alternate branch origin master, which should work. And then I'm going to select push. And it's pushing. And now it's saying connecting to it. Okay, so this is using the Git over SSH protocol. And as a result, it's going to ask us the thumbprint of the host that we're connecting to. So we're going to go ahead and add this to our known host database. However, we're going to get a push failed. Fatal, could not read from the repository. I wish... There we go. If we open up the version control console, we see authentication failed. So what happened is that we're not authenticated with Bitbucket. So let's go through the process of doing that. This is going to be lots of fun. Unfortunately, it's going to be something you have to do on every computer you plan on using Git with. Basically, what we need to do is we need to create a public-private key pair and associate the public key with Bitbucket. So to do that, we are going to use a tool that's included with the Git installation that we downloaded to generate that pair for us, and then we're going to, well, take the public key and ship it up into Bitbucket, and everything will be awesome. Okay, so the tool that we need to use is the SSH-keygen tool. And to use it, I'm actually going to be using the git bash. So I'm going to open up my start menu and type in git bash, and we'll see right there, git bash, and I'm going to hit enter. So what is git bash? Well, git bash is a command prompt, but it's using bash, the shell emulator from Unix, built for Windows. And it gives us a bunch of access to, well, it's bash. I mean, if you're familiar with Unix, then you've probably used bash at some point. This is bash for Windows, in addition to a bunch of different tools that come with the installation of Git. Because again, Git is very Linux-centric. It comes with prepackaged with a bunch of tools that are Unix-centric. Anyway, so let's go ahead and do SSH-keygen. So SSH-keygen is going to be the tool that will generate our private key for us, or our private public key pair. Now it says, enter the file to which to save the key. Notice the path here. Whenever you're in git bash, or whenever you're in any sort of bash compiled for Windows shell, notice how we have a Unix-style path, not a Windows-style path. Notice how we have /c/users instead of c:/users. Again, that's just because when we're in this environment, this is the preferred method of specifying paths. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and hit enter so that it's the default path. This is the default path for this particular private key file, and I want it to be the default path because it'll be picked up automatically by the Git repository, and there won't be any further configuration required. For the passphrase, I'm going to hit enter, and then hit enter, and I now have my key. So, this is my public and private key pair. They're both in the cusersNelson.ssh folder. So what I need to do now is I need to open up Windows Explorer and go into here and go into users, go into Nelson, and then there's this .ssh folder. Now it contains my IDRSA and my IDRSA.pub. My IDRSA is my private key. Don't ever share your private key with anyone. It's very important that you don't do that. Because if somebody has your private key, they can impersonate you in any sort of position where you use that private key for authentication purposes, such as, in this case, Bitbucket. Your public key, however, is free to share with everyone. So go ahead and don't worry too much about the security for that. Now, for generating a private public key pair, you should always have a private public key pair per computer. And the reason you want that is if your computer were to ever become compromised, you can revoke that key from accessing whatever protected or whatever protected resources that you previously were accessing it with. So I highly encourage every installation of an operating system gets its own unique public-private key pair so that, you know, things won't get as compromised, or things can be locked down if things were to get compromised. Now I'm going to right-click this. I'll go ahead and say Open With. I'm going to say More Options, and I'm going to select Notepad. And I have my public key. So this public key is how I'm going to be identified with Bitbucket. So I'll go ahead and hit Control-A and copy it to my clipboard. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Bitbucket back over onto the screen. I'm going to go all the way up to the top right and click on my profile picture. I'm going to select Manage Account. Then I'm going to come over here on the left, and I'm going to say SSH keys. Click that. And I have a list of all my SSH keys that I use. In this case, I'm going to add a key. I'm going to say, let's just call this desktop 2. And for the key, I'm going to paste in what I copied from my public key. Then I'll hit Add Key. And now I have that added, that SSH key added. So let's move this off screen. This should be everything that needs to have happen, or needs to happen in order to make this work. So let's go ahead and come up here to VCS, Git, and say push, and then push to alternative branch, master, hit push, connecting, add to a known host database, and push was successful. Master pushed to new branch origin master. So what just happened? Well, the origin master branch, the master branch on the origin remote was just created. And it's basically a copy of the master branch I have here. What is the master branch? Well, put simply, the master branch in Git, you don't commit to the repository per se, you commit to branches. and branches are underneath a repository. If you kind of think of it like a hierarchy like that. The master branch you can think of as sort of the default branch. If you're familiar with SVN, the master branch is equivalent to your trunk. Well, not quite equivalent, but close enough. Anyway, if I come back into Bitbucket and load up my repository, I can see that there's one branch. Notice how there's 2 commits, and it properly identified me as me. And if I go over into source, I can see the entire source code of the project online. And I can also come over here to commits, and I can watch the commit history. All right, that's pretty much about it, really. So I showed you guys how to set up Git, how to install it, how to integrate it with Android Studio, and how to do your commits, and how to set up with Bitbucket, and how to push things. Not terribly exciting, but incredibly important. Another important thing is that's really, you only have to do the majority of the stuff we did in this video one time. If you've done this one time, you are done, and you will be able to use Bitbucket with your Git repositories very easily in the future. Anyway, I think that pretty much wraps this video up. This wasn't meant to be an introduction to Git, just at least the bare minimum amount of steps to get it going. I highly recommend, if you have not used it before, to head over to git-sem.org and check out that tutorial that's on GitHub, because I think that'll help people understand things a little bit more if they're not familiar with source control. But anyway, I won't be really talking a whole lot about source control for the rest of this series. This was just kind of a bonus video, I guess, to show you guys, to get you guys introduced into how to use it with, how to use Android Studio with Git. So I think we'll see you guys in the next video.